are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everybody. It is 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time here in New York City. My name is Ben Weiss. I am the Digital Marketing Strategist at Infusive Solutions. Wanted to welcome everybody to today's webinar on Amplifying Your SharePoint ROI. And we're going to get going here in just a minute. Thanks so much for showing up, everybody. Okay, everyone, how we doing? How we doing this afternoon? Very excited to get going. Once again, thanks so much, everybody, for coming out this afternoon. It is 2 p.m. We are coming to you from New York City, and then we got our friends at Sabel Collaborations joining us down in Atlanta. And again, thank you so much, everybody, for showing up today. First, I just wanted to start off with mentioning that today we're here to talk about SharePoint really as a business product. And one of the first things that I wanted to mention is that while we're going to be giving a whole lot of information, I wanted to really stress that one of the big things we want to do is answer any of the questions that you have for our presenters. And so you'll see on your GoToWebinar widget that you have a question and answer pane. And so please feel free at any point during the webinar to add any questions that you might have, and we'll try to address them as organically as we can, whether it's during the content itself or whether we have some time after the presenters end up getting through their slides. And of course, always feel free to get at us on the Twittosphere, get at Infusive Solutions, at Infusive Inc., and also feel free to get at Sabel Collaborations on Twitter, at Sabel Collab. And so other than that, today we're going to be talking about SharePoint as a business product. Now, oftentimes people mistake SharePoint as an IT product, which can throw the strategy for the software off course. But today, hopefully, we'll help you avoid some of those kinds of pitfalls by learning from the diverse success stories in the market to help you understand the common pain points of SharePoint before they occur, to help you get really specific with why your company in particular needs SharePoint, and then developing that strategic plan for success with the right mix of internal staff as well as sharp consultants on your team. And with that in mind, I'd like to introduce our first presenter, my good friend and CEO, Murshid Chowdhury, who's our CEO over at Infusive Solutions. So how you doing, Murshid?
Hey, Ben. Thank you for that intro, and welcome everyone to today's webinar on Amplifying Your SharePoint ROI. First, I'd like to thank Infusive's Digital Marketing Strategist, Ben Weiss, for organizing today's event. And I'd also like to take this time to thank my co-presenter, Sam Sabel from Sabel Collaborations, for joining us as well and imparting his expertise to all of you. I'm really excited to have everyone here. Now I'll tell you a little bit about what we do here at Infusive Solutions. We have been around since 2001 and serve as an IT staffing firm that focuses on the placement of Microsoft technology professionals. We are proud members of the Microsoft Partner Network and work closely with professionals proficient in .NET, SQL, Windows System, Windows Support, and of course SharePoint, which is why we're here today. I'm very excited here to talk to you about some of the things we've seen in our neck of the woods that will hopefully help you get the best return on your SharePoint investment. I would like now to introduce my co-presenter, Sam Sabel from Atlanta, to speak to you about his organization and his expertise. Sam?
Thank you, Murshad. Yes, I'm Sam Sabel. I run Sabel Collaborations. We're a national consulting firm headquartered here in Atlanta. We focus on SharePoint Solutions, SharePoint consulting and gap analysis. We kind of come at it from the strategy realm, but we also provide development solutions and on-hand assistance. So we're really excited about this, and I guess it's probably be good just to kind of dive right into the presentation. And what we really kind of want to get at in this webinar is how do we get the most out of our SharePoint, and what are the basic best practices, what's the things that we need to know to get started. And we'll get a little in depth, but I think the first thing and the key thing that we should kind of get on the same page with is that at Sabel Collaborations we look at SharePoint as an ecosystem, not as an IT product, not as a software item that gets installed in your system and just kind of is in its own sphere, it's in a vacuum unto itself. But we see it as an ecosystem, as a life of its own. It connects with and interacts with all the different IT systems that you have today. And the more you use SharePoint, the more you find it has the ability to spread through your organization and become business critical in more and more areas. So kind of as a beginning point of orientation, I think that it's worthwhile to look at it like this and to kind of step back as well and define what is SharePoint anyway, and what does SharePoint do? And you know, even if you're familiar with SharePoint, it's good to kind of reflect on the many different forms of it. I mean, we see many different flavors going out there, and there's always a mixture of a little of this and a little bit of that, but usually people have a principal one or two uses for SharePoint, whether it is as an intranet portal, and that would be like an internal company website where a company is able to disseminate information, where a company is able to spotlight employees or events, highlight different types of things, internal communications, internal marketing, HR questions, things like frequently asked questions in general. That's a very common usage, and maybe you've seen it like that. Maybe that's how you have it. Also, you see that a lot of companies implement it as kind of a collaboration and team space area. From that perspective, what we mean is that it provides out the ability for people to set up sites very quickly, bring together a number of people and teams, and allow them to share information, share documents, and work together and have a singular place for all of them to manage that information, to collaborate together. Obviously, it has lots of really positive things. But, you know, beyond that, there's lots of other uses. In terms of project management, automation of business processes, as a kind of a singular hub for integrating all the different information, data, and content that's stored by your company. Many use it for its fantastic enterprise search potential and functionality, which basically puts it down to allows you to bring together many different forms of information from different systems. And then more and more, in a growing amount, you see social taking over and becoming a major form and a major part of the deck that SharePoint offers. And while all those and more are the kind of functionality and the many different forms of SharePoint, you never find a situation, obviously, where you only see one of those. Generally, you see a multitude of these different flavors of SharePoint mixed together. A lot of us, when we see SharePoint, we see it on the basis of how we first came across it. So many of our customers, maybe the first time they've ever seen SharePoint, they've seen it as a portal, as an intranet portal, or even as a website. And that's the way they see it. And by looking at it within that narrow lens, they are missing out sometimes on the content management and the knowledge management pieces, the integration value and the potential, the ability to provide out search on an enterprise scale. And so looking at it from kind of what we call gaps, looking at gaps, you know, it's worthwhile to step back and say, well, how did I first see SharePoint, and how much is that affecting the way I see how SharePoint can be leveraged within my company? So I think that that's a important point. I know that this is something that we all struggle with anyway, but how can we get more out of SharePoint? And so I kind of want to get into a couple of examples of how SharePoint's been used in some pretty unique ways, just to get us started and kind of get our minds kind of going. First example I want to talk about is a international construction material producer. And this company produces out building supply that's used in your home and your office. You're sitting probably within their product right now. And they distribute it both out to major other distributors, but also you pick it up at your Ace or Home Depot store. This is a product that is everywhere. And obviously, being in that consumer market, they have competitors. And in everything you do, if you're in the consumer market, you always want to be heady of what your competitors are doing. So what this company did was, with their SharePoint, which they have been investing in for a number of years, they actually built out a custom application or a custom tool to scourge the web, to crawl through the web, and to keep monitors on and an eye on their competitors' product pricing, the price points out there, and to automatically put that up against their own pricing and their own cost of material and their own similar, related data points. And what this allowed, and they opened this up to their entire organization. They did this using SharePoint search, so that whenever anyone does a search on a certain type of product within their SharePoint, not only do they get a sense of what the cost is for this company, but they get a sense of what their price points are for them and price points are for competitors. And if you think about how this informs both executive decisions, pricing decisions, research and development positions, this has had the ability to affect so many different business units within that company in a positive way by having updated information. And to me, just that convergence of internal data, their own price points, their own knowledge of how much these materials cost for them and to a certain extent for their competitors, and putting that up against the price points that it's actually being sold to the consumer market at for their competitors, that is a very creative solution. And it's a great example of how data can be integrated using SharePoint. Speaking a little earlier, I know I mentioned, team collaboration is, these team sites where people can come together and they can act upon the same documents. But we also talked about SharePoint as a portal solution, which is where information is disseminated throughout your organization. When we talk about this, and when people generally talk about SharePoint, they talk about SharePoint in terms of content management. But what I want to do is focus for a second on what I call knowledge management, which is, yes, content is static. It's something you write it out, someone can see it, they can come back and review it. But knowledge encompasses knowing what to do with that content. And see, that's one of the cool things about SharePoint is your ability to provide out automated business process and workflows to develop them out pretty quickly. And this is this concept I definitely want to float out there a lot more. It's knowledge management. Content management is not enough. It's not enough just to watch your information. When you've gotten that firm bedrock in place of taking a look at the content, you want to be able to act upon that better. And so with the concept of knowledge management in place, I can give this example of a company that came to me a couple years ago, and they had just had this scenario where this is a state agency, and they have to deal with thousands of contracts every year. I mean, if you can imagine. If you ever dealt with a contract, you know that after a certain amount of time, it comes up for renewal. Every business has some type of contracts they have to deal with. There's multiple forms of it, in fact. But they had thousands they had to deal with, and especially at a very particular, the start of the year, they have to deal with a lot all at once. And one contract that was coming up for renewal had slipped through the cracks somehow. It had not been renewed in time. And this forced the state agency to go back and renegotiate out the service contract. And this, in total, cost them millions of dollars. So when they came to me, they said, look, what we need here is a solution to make sure this never happens again. We need peace of mind. You know, we need to know that we will not miss any more contracts. And we talked with them, and They actually had SharePoint running within their agency, and we said, well, why don't we leverage what you already have in place? Let's load in and let's store and manage your contracts through SharePoint. Not just put them in there, but let's set up alerts and notifications so that when a contract is coming up for renewal, that the appropriate parties for that particular contract are notified. And then if within a certain amount of time they don't act, or they don't inform SharePoint of having acted upon that contract, then it gets escalated. It goes up the chain. And their management, their supervisors, those responsible for this contract are notified. And then when the final hour hits, when it's time now or never to renew that contract, and no one has made it clear that they're allowing this contract to lapse, it escalated further. It gets escalated up to make sure that everyone knows this contract is about to expire. And see, what they walked away from was not only this concept of being able to save potentially millions through human error, right? Which is what had happened to them, is simple human error, and they lost millions of dollars. But beyond that, they have the peace of mind and the security to know that they actually took that lesson. They're leveraging with the technology they've already invested in. They're utilizing it better. And so for me, this is that critical kind of thing of getting value out of SharePoint in a very clear way. And obviously, they wish they had done this before, but now they know going forward that they will always hit those marks. Another great example of kind of people rocking SharePoint and really getting value out of it. And I think you'll notice that these examples, they're not like, we saved X amount of dollars in X way. Now, this is a question of improving your business. And so the next example was a customer who, what they did was they're a large company that has a CRM, a customer database of well over 10,000. Companies and hospitals, etc. And they need to manage this, and they have different salespeople in different regions assigned to different contracts, and it's actually very convoluted and very complex because it's such a large organization with such a complex history. And what they wanted to be able to do was to surface in their intranet portal as much of their CRM system as they could, so that anyone within an organization, if they ever needed to find out anything about any particular potential customer, they could go in and they could see the entire history of that company's relationship with that customer. They would know who to speak to. They would know who to escalate to for technical difficulties. They'd know who to go to for marketing or for sales. They would have all this stuff at their fingertips. And they did this through their portal. They did this by leveraging SharePoint Search. And what this meant for them was that their entire organization of 30,000 plus employees potentially became a part of their customer relationship team. That's fantastic. And the extent to which they publicize that out has everything to do with the amount that they've been able to have success with that. So I think, just kind of looking at this, to me, these are great examples of how companies are utilizing the potential of SharePoint. And we're all inspired by the successes of our peers, what they have been able to accomplish with SharePoint, and this has driven the overwhelming adoption of SharePoint across industry verticals. And we can see why people are doing this. This is clearly the direction that enterprise IT is heading, and we all want to take advantage of the best that technology has to offer within our own enterprises. And this is the right decision. I know, Murshid, that you wanted to speak a little bit more to this.
Yes, thank you, Sam. I appreciate that. So basically what I wanted to touch base is on what we wanted to avoid here. One of the things that we've seen is you want to avoid what we call the shiny toy syndrome. Basically what that is they have it, and so we want it too. And I'll share an example of that a little bit. But basically what I wanted to cover is SharePoint. Before you implement SharePoint in any environment, you need to understand what I consider the 4 Ps of success. Number 1 being purpose. Why do you want to implement Microsoft SharePoint? Number 2, plan. How will you go about doing it? Number 3, process. What are the steps to make that happen? And number 4, like anything else, patience. It takes time. This product, even implemented, is not going to be an overnight solution or an overnight sensation. So we had a story not too long ago where basically one of our government agencies or one of our clients came to us and said that they wanted to get SharePoint resources. They wanted a SharePoint developer, a SharePoint administrator. When I started to ask them about the 4 Ps, in terms of what is the plan, what is the process, what is the purpose, they didn't have a good response to that. So basically it came down to the fact that other agencies had it, they wanted it, and they wanted to get it implemented without even having the right roadmap as to how. So this is something that, once we discussed it, realized that they were not ready for this particular product. They would have invested a good amount of money and a good amount of time and resources on this particular project without really having a real clear goal as to what they wanted to achieve. And we're seeing that not just in the government sector, we've seen it in some of our legal clients, we've seen it in some of our media clients. It's just, hey, they have it, we want it too. And although it's a great product, as Sam has already alluded to, and it's an awesome piece of software, the problem is you need to know if it makes sense for your environment before you start investing in it. So again, one of the things I we would like to repeat is that you need to make sure that the 4 Ps are in place. Number 1, what is the purpose? Why do you need it? Number 2, what is the plan? How do you go about implementing it? And that's going to include a lot of different things, whether the consulting, the ideas, the staffing, the resources, the process, what are the actual steps to make sure that your team's on board to make sure it happens, and of course patience, everywhere from the management side to the team that's involved to even your users who are going to be using it. So have those 4 Ps in place. Make sure this is something that really makes sense for you, your team, your organization, and be clear on your objectives. And if you don't answer these questions and these 4 Ps, then some major problem can occur. Am I right about that, Sam?
Yes. Sorry, I had a mic difficulty for a second there. Absolutely. Kind of want to jump back in and talk a little bit about some of the landmines and key factors that you're going to be facing. I mean, SharePoint is a important business decision, to say the least. It's a great business decision. However, there are landmines, there are pain points that you're going to face. This is the case of implementing any large enterprise application. And there are some important factors that should be kept in mind in order to maximize your success. Failing to this obviously can cause some undue hardships, and these hardships can absolutely be circumvented. We've already bled a little bit over SharePoint. We know a little bit about what it's going to take to get around this. And one of the first things is kind of a point of orientation. It's important to view SharePoint as a business solution, not as an IT product. And then this impacts how you look at, number 1, how to staff for it, who to put on it, who should manage and run it, it affects how the strategy of SharePoint should go. It affects the design of SharePoint. If you look at SharePoint as a product to turn on, get some network engineers and system engineers to maintain, and fundamentally not to continually reinvest and reanalyze the value that you're getting out of SharePoint, you're not going to get much from SharePoint. SharePoint adoption and reputation within your organization is going to be shot pretty quickly. I mean, not that if it already has been, it's not like you can't recover from that. But it's important to look at it in the terms of SharePoint is a business product. It's a business solution. It provides a whole deck of services for the business. And while it requires IT to maintain it and IT expertise to really bring it forward and to keep it going, it is in essence for the business. And that kind of that helps you understand who needs to be involved in these things. And we're going to get a little more into that in a second. One of the biggest landmines out there actually is the sales pitch. And it's kind of important to get right past it. There's a couple of things. SharePoint's a fantastic product. And there's a reason why it's kind of grown in the way that it has over the last couple of years. But at the same time, we got to understand that Microsoft is a sales organization. So when they engage us and they talk to us about their products and they say things like I just said, Microsoft is an excellent product, they're going to come out and they're going to tilt everything in terms of sales, selling of licenses. And there's a couple of things to say in particular that have been caused some issues, and kind of want to speak to those. The first one is out of the box. The claim that there's all these functions and features out of the box with SharePoint. Particularly, they say SharePoint Search is out of the box. Turnkey, just turn it on and go. The reality is, to implement SharePoint and get the most out of it, you really want to come out with a plan, with some strategy, with some sense of direction, some sense of what are we trying to accomplish with SharePoint. And on that basis, as you implement out SharePoint, you absolutely want to look at things like search and say, how can we get search working for us? It's not enough for search just to work. It's not enough to know that if I type in a word in the search box and click search, that results will be returned. Those results need to have meaning. They need to be worthwhile. They need to be what we're actually looking for. Because what happens very quickly is, it's like what I look at as the Alta Vista example. It's like, would you go to Alta Vista to do a web search today? No, you go to something like Google or Bing. And the reason why is because you know that Google returns the results you're looking for. If you went out to Google again today and it could not return the results that you're looking for, if every time you went to Google, how many searches would you do with Google where you never found what you're looking for? The same is true within a company. When people use search, it doesn't return what they're looking for, it becomes counterproductive. So, and this is the case across the board with SharePoint. So out of the box, yes, features work, but do they work in a way that your company can leverage, in a way that brings any value to you? No, you need to plan for that. You need to administer to that. So that's a big thing we gotta get past very quickly. Out of the box. Navigation is out of the box. But let me tell you, most companies that have implemented navigation using the out-of-the-box features, their employees, their users, they leverage their browser's bookmarks to navigate SharePoint. And this speaks both to the problems with out-of-the-box search and problems with out-of-the-box navigation. That's just a quick example. Another big sales item is that SharePoint's built on .NET technology, and that's true, absolutely. It's built on .NET technology. And Microsoft goes in there and says, well, you should be able to transition your .NET developers, C#, VB.NET developers, to support and maintain and develop solutions in SharePoint rather quickly. And while it's true that it's built on .NET, SharePoint itself has its own object model. And what that means is that you develop for SharePoint in ways that you would not develop anywhere else. So what this means is that we actually have to be there for any staff that we transition. We also need to understand that what they know, even if they're experts in the field of .NET, does not necessarily, and in many times does not translate. Now what they know is the syntax. They know the programming language. That doesn't mean that they're going to, without support and help, be able to provide out timely solutions as quickly as they have been able to with .NET. So kind of getting at that and developing out of that point, the question kind of becomes, what kind of team do you need? How can we bring together the right grouping of people? I can't tell you how often it comes across my desk, and I'm sure it comes across Mershad's even more than mine. Requests for a particular position. We need a SharePoint.NET/architect, SharePoint developer/architect. Now I look at this every time and I think, well, this is extremely difficult to do, as architecture is networking and information architecture and these kind of concepts, and development is a whole different skill set. And I think it's worthwhile to step back from that and say, there's not a superhero for SharePoint. There's not anyone that can do everything that goes on with SharePoint. SharePoint is, like I said earlier, it's an ecosystem. It touches on all different kinds of systems, all different kinds of functionality and value. And what that means is you need all kinds of people to get the most out of it. And I want to speak a little bit to that. So what you're not going for is that superhero. What you need to be able to do, and what the struggle and the challenge is to bring together your league of superheroes. You really want to be able to find that right new kind of team, a hybrid team, to suit to what you're trying to accomplish with SharePoint. A great example of a hybrid team would be having a number of staff along these lines. You definitely need to have business leading. Business analysts should be setting the terms of what's developed within SharePoint. It's not an IT product. It is a business solution. So you need to, any effective SharePoint team will have business analysts as a major component, a leading component. You do need to have web designers, not developers. I mean, you do need developers as well, but web designers being distinct from that. People who understand how to make things work well. They understand user interface design so that everything goes well and that people know what they're doing intuitively. So they know how to leverage SharePoint, know how to use the functionality you're developing, and so they know how to make the SharePoint look good. Because almost every product that's ever been developed for SharePoint that looks like SharePoint has been put in front of the executives, the C-suite, and the C-suite says, yes, this is great, this is fantastic, it's everything we wanted, everything we asked for, except for it looks like SharePoint, so take it back. Let's make it not look like SharePoint. Designers are a major component of SharePoint. Developers, you need .NET developers, absolutely, for custom solutions. These developers need the time and the training and the space to grow and learn SharePoint as a new technology. You're also obviously you're going to need project manager, but you're also going to need a set of people to excuse me, I got stuck on a note. But you definitely want to bring together that nice mixture of analysts, developers, and you also need the technical staff, the engineer staff, those people that understand how to stand up and set up servers, how to maintain the security between them, your networking engineers. And so it's bringing together the developers, the designers, the tech, the networking staff, and your business analysts together. It brings together just what is a fantastic team for SharePoint. And obviously, for every different company and every different project, there should be a different balance here. But these are the essential building blocks of an effective team. And finding staff with SharePoint is extremely difficult. You know, the skill set is, the growth of SharePoint has been astronomical. If SharePoint broke off into its own business, it would be one of the 50 top IT businesses out there. So with this being said, the staffing out there has been difficult, had a hard time to keep up. So it's kind of difficult. There's a gap there from staff to demand. And I know a lot of companies are kind of getting stuck on this question of find the right for SharePoint. And Chet, you have a couple of comments on this, I know.
Yes, I do, Sam, and thanks for that information. But here, basically what we have is when you don't get the 4 Ps right, you run into a lot of these issues. And one of them is the second one I mentioned, which is the plan. A lot of what we're seeing, and particularly what happened with one of our law firm clients, is they came to us and they wanted to hire a .NET resource with some SharePoint experience. They were unaware of the market conditions and the pitfalls of that, which is that, you know, SharePoint, as Sam has spoken to before, is a product in and of itself. And although it's programmed in .NET languages, you really need to make sure you have the right team on board to make sure that your investment functions properly. So basically what ended up happening is they were looking to find a .NET developer with SharePoint experience. Obviously, that took a while because they wanted a hybrid person. And what ended up happening is that the search started taking a long time. But basically what that leads to over time is they went and started speaking to their team and said, okay, now we're not finding this resource, so what we're going to do is now make our .NET developers our SharePoint developers. And over time, many problems can occur from that. One of the first things that happens is if you're not properly communicating the goals and the purpose of the team to your staff, you're not going to be on the same page. So that's number one. Number two, assuming that your .NET developers and SharePoint developers are one and the same is a major critical mistake many organizations do. And they end up with bringing it to point number three, which is overburdening their current staff. They not only are responsible for SharePoint projects, they're also responsible for their original .NET projects, and next thing you know, they are being pulled in two directions and overburdening them, putting in long hours. As the long hours start piling up and the projects are starting to pile up, they start feeling what we call staff demoralization. And that's basically what ends up happening. That's what was happening at this legal firm. Then we advise them that, you know, the best way to do that is to make sure that you get the right resource to work on this particular project, which meant that you need to make sure that you get a SharePoint developer if that's what you're looking for. And yes, you know, some of the .NET staff can definitely help, but you need that expertise, especially if you're going to do something in an enterprise level. Now, some of the solutions that can come, and again, these are solutions, they can come, if they're properly planned, they can be perfect way to plan for anything, but if you did end up implementing SharePoint and all of a sudden now realize that you haven't planned properly, these are some of the solutions that can help you throughout this. Number one is reaching out to staffing firms, but realize that with that there will come cost, the agency fees or contractual fees that come with staffing, whether it's a contractor or a full-time person. Number two, time. I mean, in order to get a SharePoint resource nowadays, it's going to take time. This is a software that's very much in demand. Administrators as well as developers are very sought after. From the beginning of a search, I would say it would take anywhere from 2 to 6 weeks to even land the right person for your environment. Take into consideration, on top of that, you need another 2 weeks for this person to give notice, because most SharePoint developers and administrators are gainfully employed. And finally, after they do come on board, you need a 2-week honeymoon period to get them up to speed with what your purpose, your plan, your process is in your organization. So when you're looking at it, you're almost looking at being 2 months out before the work starts to take place. So that's one solution. Second one would be training. One of the things that many of our clients are doing is sending their .NET developers to SharePoint training, which is great. But some of the challenges that come for that is, again, cost for training. Number two, downtime. While they are training, they can't be at work because they're out there learning the new technology. And realize this, if you're a hiring manager, that if you are sending your team out to SharePoint training, they are going to have very marketable skill sets, and they're going to be commanding higher pay, and if you're not able to pay them what they're worth, they are going to seek employment elsewhere. So it's great, they'll come in, they'll do what they need to do for you, but realize if you don't have the right vision in place for your team, or the right pay structure, or whatever it is that keeps your team intact, you may end up losing this person. Now you've already invested time, money into training, and now this person who's trained will end up going on and serving some other business in a different department, in a different company. So you want to avoid that. The other solution can be consulting. A lot of what Sabel does at Sabel Collaborations. Again, same issues that come up here. There is a cost associated. There's time for a consultant to understand your environment, find out what are the key problems, and then offer solutions. And something that many of you may not take into consideration, sometimes consultants are just viewed as outsiders by the team. So making sure from the get that you position your team to understand that this person is coming in as an outside resource, as a person who is an extension of the team with the blessings of management, who's here to help, and not seen as someone who is here to be a second manager. It's a very important thing. So those are a couple of the things that are solutions that you can offer. But the take-home point from these examples is that failing to launch a SharePoint environment with the right resources can generate a major loss of productivity and can be a major time loss as well. So again, what I said before, a lot of it comes down to those 4 Ps, to making sure what is the purpose, what is the plan, what is the process, and then having the patience to make sure everything is executed properly. So with the proper forethought, all of these issues can be seamlessly avoided. Right, Sam?
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, absolutely. And kind of jumping more into this concept of why a League of Superheroes, and how does this relate to SharePoint? I think it's worthwhile to look at it like this. You know, every project has its own needs and its own skill set it's needed, and that's true of any enterprise project, particularly of any SharePoint project. And that's why it's kind of hard to know exactly what that League of Superheroes should look like at any given point. So many people kind of come out there and they look for a superhero that can do everything. And what I was trying to kind of get at was, when we look at it in this way, you're not going to find that. What you want to do is figure out what is our principal use of SharePoint within our organization. How are we mainly using it? Are we mainly using it for business automation, business process automation? Are we mainly using it for search and portal? Are we mainly using it for social? And that should inform what kind of League of Superheroes you bring together. And that should inform who you look for when you go out into that job market. But more fundamentally, if you bring together the right mixture of skill sets, people that you already have, and maybe you need to bring in some additional people or some consultants to help, you bring together the right league, there's very few projects that that can't be handled. I mean, look, this is a transition product. SharePoint is in transition. All of enterprise IT is in transition right now. This poses all kinds of new challenges to us. I mean, Microsoft is trying to keep up to date. They bought Yammer recently to try to stay up to pace in the social, which is good to see. We want to see that kind of thing. There's a lot going on, and we're all, whether we're coming at this from the hiring sphere or from IT or from the business, we're all trying to keep up and get a sense of how can we get the most out of this. And I think it's important to understand that with things like SharePoint, especially when you're just starting out, it requires business to act methodically and patiently. But it also, which is, very important, but it also, we need to understand to a certain extent, we're going to learn in the fire. This is every company's experience, even those with the great success story. It takes some trial and error. It takes some getting on, because while SharePoint's a great platform, a great ecosystem, it's going to shape itself to your particular business. And you can't just say, you can't feel that in a modular way what company A learned is going to automatically apply to company B. Everyone's company is different. The way they run it, even if they're in the same industry selling the same product. They have a different culture. They have different ways to interact. They have different organizations. And they also have different ways that they do things, even the same thing. So to a certain extent, we're going to learn in the fire. And this is a good thing. And this is a part of a new technology, and also a technology in transition that's being developed over the last 10, 20 years, and is going to continue to develop in the next decade. But in the end, this is well worth the effort. As well, even those who have gotten off to a rocky start, we've seen many examples, actually most examples, with SharePoint start out a little rocky. But people, time after time, are able to turn around, leverage SharePoint for its great business value, and show conclusively an ever-growing substantial return on their investment. At the same time, it's worthwhile to know where you can learn from people that already have been in the fire. So going out and finding some outside assistance and staying in the right track. Rashad, you have a great example of it.
Thank you, Sam. I actually do. So basically, we were working with one of our larger media clients here in the greater New York City area. And this is a client of ours that we've done a lot of business with. And, they actually did it right. They had their purpose in place as why they wanted to go to SharePoint. The manager of application development who ran that environment was someone who came from a Microsoft development background, but he was not a SharePoint expert. And so he came to us and said, one of the things that I need to make sure this software runs properly in my environment is I think we need to get the right resources on board, and that being a SharePoint administrator and a SharePoint developer to join the team that he already had on the Microsoft side to make sure that they can work seamlessly. And basically, once they had the right people on board, balance was there. This was a huge environment, and he knew that from the beginning this was going to be something that was not going to be a one-man show. They didn't need one superhero, they needed a league of superheroes, as Sam had mentioned before. And that was making sure that they proportioned the right staff to do the right responsibilities. They avoided some of the issues that we mentioned before. They avoided all the issue of staff demoralization, where they weren't overburdening their current staff. The team knew exactly what they wanted to accomplish. They welcomed the 2 new people on board as members of the extension of the new team. And they weren't looking at it from a perspective where, am I undervalued? What's going on in this environment? Do I need the right training? They were learning from the 2 people that came on board. So again, it came back to understanding those 4 Ps, and again, I can't emphasize this more emphatically. Number 1, purpose. What is the reason that you're implementing Microsoft SharePoint? Number 2, what is your plan? Number 3, what is the process? And number 4, having the patience. Now, after they've implemented the Microsoft SharePoint, they got the right people on board. The manager's patient. He knew there was going to be some time in order to get these right resources, to find them, and then get them acclimated to the new culture of the environment. But when I checked in on them after 90 days from when their search started, it looked like the team was doing well, the environment was moving forward, and the company was meeting the objectives that they initially sought. So this was an example, and really it's a great example of a company that just did it right. They understood what they needed. They wanted to make sure they had the right resources on board, and they really spoke to other people ahead of time to make sure that they didn't fall into some of those pitfalls. And from a staffing perspective, what was the most important thing? They retained the staff that they had and integrated the new staff that they brought on. And that's always very key, because as we all know, without the right resources and without the right team, it's really, really difficult to get your objectives met. So I'm going to now hand it over to Sam, who will talk a little bit about how, from the consulting perspective, this can also be a great solution.
Absolutely. That is a great example, and this is the kind of thing that we see, and that we see our customers struggling with, is finding the right staff, and it's not an easy thing. But to take an example of a company that got it right, that already had that staff in place, they had been early adopters of SharePoint, and they had kind of burned in the fire early on, and they had brought together very much of a fantastic dynamic team, very similar to the kind of hybrid team I spoke of earlier: analysts, designers, developers, technical networking techs. They brought it together, and they had done very well. This was also headquartered here, a major media firm, and dealt with tens of thousands of employees, and they really were just rocking it. And on site, they had a project management solution called Clarity. Now, Clarity, if you don't know, is not made by Microsoft, and so naturally you would say, well, will this thing even integrate? And most things will with SharePoint, but it's not a given because it's not built by Microsoft. Any smart person would say, well, different company, maybe it won't work together. But this company had a strategy. They wanted their employees to work in as few systems as possible. They loved they loved Clarity as their project management solution. They didn't want to move past it. At the same time, they wanted their staff to be able to go to SharePoint as the singular place of work to the extent possible. So in front of them, they had the challenge of integrating fully, to the extent possible fully, Clarity with SharePoint, both for reporting and for inputting information into it. And they looked around, they looked at what they had. They had a great team of SharePoint and social media experts. They had a great team of Clarity experts. But what they didn't have was people that knew and had a lot of experience with integrating solutions like Clarity into SharePoint in a full and meaningful way. So what they determined to do was that they would go out, and this is like, for them, this is a one-off. Normally, they can handle most projects within the company. Normally, they don't need to go to outside. But here was a particular situation where they didn't have the experience, and while they had staff that could learn it, the amount of time and training to go in to learn this skill set that only needed to be used once didn't work out. It didn't make sense to them. So they went out to consultants to come in, do this work, and as a prerequisite for that engagement, they made very clear that they wanted there to be a very deep knowledge transfer, so that the Clarity and SharePoint staff they had on hand fully felt comfortable that they understood how the integration worked, so that they could maintain it and troubleshoot it and go forward. So, and this way they brought in people that had already done it, already knew how to do it, and they used those people to implement it so they could get their goals done in a timely way and get the value out of that as quickly as possible. And at the same time, they leverage that as a training opportunity for their staff. And to me, this is just a fantastic example of where people should look to boutique firms to step in and provide that essential skill set that, by bringing in, like Mershad has spoken to earlier, bringing in a new staff to do this, or rehiring staff, it pushes back the time frame of delivery. It has an extreme training expense. There are ways to bring that stuff together and bring that stuff down, and they're very creative. And I think it's also worthwhile to note that, as I spoke to earlier, with SharePoint, you have to be patient. In order to get over the initial pain points and to get into it, it requires that kind of force of will to plod through the initial struggles and to find the quick wins while you're doing that. And as a great example to to me of this is a school board who was tasked with setting up a parent-teacher-student portal. And if you think about what that means, parent-teacher-student portal, if you think about what that means in terms of regulatory compliance, when it comes to how records need to be managed, stored, and secured on a SharePoint site, or in any kind of site, there's a lot of requirements there. They wanted it to be audience aware. They wanted it to be secured. And they looked through a number of different vendors trying to find the right solution. And for a number of reasons, they landed upon SharePoint and made the strategic decision that they were going to invest in SharePoint as their content management system to implement their parent-teacher-student portal. And being a state budgeted entity, they had limited funding. And in the first year, they were only able to implement a small amount of the functionality that they wanted to. They didn't get all upset or sour about this. What they did was, instead of getting sour about it, they took their time and they did the parts that they could do, and they did them really well. They put a lot of time and attention to it. And the result of this was, by the end of the first year, they had actually gotten a good reputation. They were able to have an increased budget going into the second year because they had shown return of value on this. The second year went just as well, where they had an increased budget. They still were not able to do everything they wanted to do, but what they did work on, they focused on it really well. And by the end of that year, not only did they have an increased budget yet again, but they also had won a number of grants on the basis of what they had done in their first year and a half. I mean, this is just a fantastic example of people really kind of rocking it out. In their third year, they took that additional stuff. They were able to accomplish all their initial goals. They were able to accomplish additional functionality goals that came out of the feedback of parents and students and teachers, and implement additional things. And they keep rolling today, and they're doing fantastic. And if you think about this, they did this with a SharePoint staff of 3, 2 of whom were IT, and 1 of whom had never done anything IT in their career. So to me, this is a great example of taking the time, getting through the pain points, and really focusing on what you are trying to accomplish to maximize your SharePoint investment. This point, I know we kind of want to start wrapping up. We're in the last couple of minutes, so there's a couple of take-home points I want to hit at pretty briefly. First of all, SharePoint has a variety of uses in different forms. It's important to look at that and understand how are we using SharePoint, and therefore how should we continue to grow what we're doing with SharePoint, and also to identify the gaps of what you could be using with SharePoint. Second of all, SharePoint should be treated as a business product, not an IT product, and this has ramifications throughout how you look at SharePoint from terms of staffing, the solutions that you develop, but also how you maintain it and how you engage your user community in using it. 3, if leadership ignores this and treats it just like any other IT product, this will lead to problems, and they will be costly. Whether that cost is going to be today or in a couple years when you have to fix these things. It needs to be looked at today. SharePoint grows so quick in the organization that the sooner you can get to your pain points and resolve them, the less cost it will be. And the best way to avoid these pain points is to get very specific. Before take action, look at your business and determine exactly what needs to be filled. With the best understanding of that, it makes it easier to understand whether it's appropriate to seek out long-term employment, consulting, or a hybrid solution. Beyond that, doing an analysis before you start investing or beginning a process search will save you time. It will save you money, and this is true of any product, but more than any other, well, not more than any other, but this is strongly the case for SharePoint. And beyond that, I just want to drive home my intention, and our intentions here is Aspire. You are diving into SharePoint, and it's a very good decision. SharePoint is a fantastic product that's really leading the way today in terms of collaboration, and it's growing quickly in terms of social, especially with this acquisition recently of Yammer. There's a myriad of ways that SharePoint can bring value to business, and the hurdles associated with it are just a part of what anyone needs to go through in order to get that value. Any new implementation, any new migration is going to bring some stress. But with patience and with the right roadmap planned forward, designed by the right people with the right team, SharePoint can absolutely be one of the most fulfilling investments that your company makes. Now, Ben, do we have some time for some Q&A?
Yes, absolutely we do. And first of all, I just wanted to I wanted to thank all of our attendees for coming in today. Thanks so much for sitting through all these extremely insightful slides. Thank you to Sam and Rashed, but definitely thank you to all of you. And yes, one of the questions that we got from Lori was, is SharePoint 2007 to 2013 leveraging CRMs to the full extent of content management? So what do you think about that, Sam?
No, it's not. Not to the full extent that it should. I'm not sure what CRM solution you're using, but there is a number of ways to come at CRM with SharePoint, and I'll be extremely brief here. There's Microsoft products like Dynamics. There are other vendors' products, and then there are custom-built CRM solutions. I believe that SharePoint can do better here, and Microsoft seems to as well, because even in all their announcements around 2013, they keep speaking to the Dynamics integration and saying, keep looking here, we're going to integrate this more fully going forward. But beyond that, 2013 has done a good job of setting their services so that they're, and I'm not going to try to get technical here, but they made it easier for other tools to integrate with. So the platform, the ability for Microsoft to integrate solutions like CRM in is increased with 2013 over the previous solutions, and absolutely this is the case between 2007 and 2013.
Okay, great. That's awesome. Thanks so much for that, Sam. And then another big question that we had, which I think is really great to address, is why someone would go with a full-time staffing solution versus a short-term consulting approach or even a long-term consulting approach. And so I think that Murshid, you actually have some insight into that question. So Murshid, maybe you can address.
Thank you, Ben. I'd be happy to. If you're getting a contractor or a consultant on board for your SharePoint solutions, one of the things that you want to take into consideration is this is going to be what we call a shorter-term solution. Again, the search time to find the right contractor can be faster than finding a full-time employee, so that's one advantage. One disadvantage could be the cost could be higher. Again, you're paying this person on a contractual basis. These are subject matter experts that are going to come in and then resolve the problem. Also, what you need to take into consideration, you must understand the problem well before you reach out to a contractor, because they're coming in to resolve the issues. Now, a good contractor or a good consultant will come in and help you identify your pain points, help you identify the problem really clearly, and then offer the proper solutions. And like I mentioned before in the webinar, you also want to take into consideration some of the issues of the outsider approach, where a consultant comes in, he needs to be someone that can integrate well with the team that you have on board as well as with you, and to make sure that it's a seamless approach to getting the problem resolved. Now, if you're going with a full-time employee, realize from a search perspective, it's going to take a little bit longer to find a full-time employee than it would a contractual employee. One of the other things that with a full-time employee, you really need to spend time and clearly state your objectives, your goals, what it is that you are trying to accomplish, because they're going to be a key player on your team. Another issue that you have to realize is that you have to integrate with the new team. So whether that's having the team meet with them before they come on board or going out with them prior to them starting with you, that's very big, because this person is going to be an integral part of your team, someone who's going to be there for the long haul. And so integration with the team is a key aspect of making sure that it's going to be successful. And finally, when you bring on a full-time employee, you also have to think about what would be the growth for this person. So they're going to come in, they're going to help you run your SharePoint environment, but like anyone else who is a good employee or someone who has aspirations to do well, they're going to want to know where the future lies in your organization and what it means for their growth. So those are a couple of the differences that I'd like to highlight between going with a contractual resource as opposed to a full-time. Both are solutions, as I mentioned before, and also, training is an option as well. But just realize what it is that you need. What do you think is going to get the best ROI for you? What do you need to propel your organization and this product forward to make sure that it runs seamlessly for you, for your team, and for your users and
Right, absolutely. Thank you so much, Merched, for that very detailed answer. That was fantastic. And a third question that we got, which I think is actually really fantastic, is how can I assess what are some quick wins with new ways to use SharePoint in my business? And I think that Sam can definitely speak to this. And I apologize that we're going a bit over the 60-minute time allotted, but I think that this is a great question. So Sam, do you think that maybe you could shed some light on that one?
Absolutely. Quick wins with SharePoint. I mean, if you look at what a quick win is made up of, it needs to be a win, which means it needs to be successful. It needs to be quick, which means it needs to be timely. But beyond that, for it to really be a win, it needs to have an audience. People need to take notice of it. So the way I like to come at it is I like to grid it out. I look at the number of projects we're looking at, and I put them up against these criteria. What is the priority and to who? So is this like high priority to people that are decision makers related to SharePoint? And I put that and I compare that to the amount of time and effort it will take to accomplish it. And what we look for with quick wins are the items with the biggest audience or the biggest or most notable audience and the smallest amount of time and effort. And that's how we assess a quick win. So sometimes the fastest thing to do is not actually the quick win. It's just a fast thing to be done because there's no win in it if no one notices or it's just a basic thing. That's not saying that those things should be put off forever, but the quick wins that you identify should be ones that prove the point that SharePoint provides value and that you're able to prove that point within a timely way. If possible, you want that quick win to show the potential for some other projects that you have on deck. So if it's like an integration solution, you can do, if you have a number of systems you want to integrate, you might want to identify the one with the much extent possible, the much exposure, and quickest one possible within those, and do that one. And that will help justify the costs associated with doing the more laborious and larger integrations that you have planned down the road. So from a quick win thing, I would definitely compare time and effort, but compare that against audience and significance of the project. Find that good median. And you can literally do this within Excel. You just go on the X across from horizontally. You do time and effort, and then on the up and down, you do the significance of the audience, and you can chart out which projects are where, and then make a decision. There's subjective factors involved, absolutely there. But overall, if you chart it out in that way, some things are going to stand out well above others.
That's fantastic. Thanks so much, Sam. You've really been a fantastic host. And so that's everything that we have today. And so once again, I just really wanted to drive home that we really wanted to inspire today. That we really wanted to illustrate the diverse uses of SharePoint, and we want to show you that, yes, while there are some ways that people can get caught up, while there are some pain points, there's definitely so many ways that you can avoid them, and the real way is to really get specific. Look at your team and determine, do I have the resources in order to handle a migration or an implementation or to set up a new project internally, or do I need to look for a new developer and engage either my internal recruiters, my internal HR department, or otherwise partner with a third-party staffing agency? Or thinking, do I just need someone on a one-off basis? Am I just looking for a consultant here? So really getting specific with your need and really looking at why am I using SharePoint right now? I think that that's really gonna help our community maximize their return on an investment and to really avoid this stress and make sure that all of their important business critical documents in SharePoint are really being used to their full potential. And so other than that, here's a slide with all of our information. Of course, feel free to get at us anytime, even if it's just a talk, even if it's just to ask a question. We feel that the most important thing that we can provide is honesty and really understanding that, Microsoft SharePoint is really best used with a couple knowledgeable SharePoint partners. And so thank you so much once again for being here. Once again, my name is Ben Weiss, the digital marketing strategist for Infusive, and I'll let Merched sign off now. So finally, thank you so much. So finally, thank you so much again.
Yeah, Sam and I would like to thank all of our guests for joining us today. It is rare where you have a unique blend of both a staffing and a consultative approach to maximizing your SharePoint investment and resolving any issues that may arise. We're at your disposal to offer any advice or expertise to any issues you might be facing, whether or not you're thinking about implementing SharePoint or whether you have implemented it and are looking for ways to make it run more efficiently. We are here to help. Once again, we really appreciate your time you spent with us today and look forward to answering any further questions you may have now or in the future and offline. Thank you again.
Yeah, thank you. This is Sam Sabel. I just want to thank everyone as well. Really enjoyed this, and we'll be doing more later. So keep an eye out. Thank you, guys. Have a good day.